The fog over Harbor Fall didn't just roll in from the sea. It seeped up from the pavement, tasting of salt, rust, and diesel. It clung to the steel bones of the bridges and muffled the constant, groaning engines of container ships gliding unseen through the night. This was a city built on foundations of cold water and colder secrets. Mara Quinn, at 29, knew those secrets better than most. She'd spent her career trying to drag them into the light. It had cost her a corner office at the city's biggest newspaper, a stable salary, and any semblance of a normal life. Her last story, a meticulously sourced expose on Port Authority corruption, had been buried so deep it suffocated, and she'd been pushed out with it. Now, she was independent. She breathed in the damp air from the rooftop of a converted warehouse, the cold metal of a new key pressing into her palm. This loft, with its exposed brick and massive, unblinking windows overlooking the logistics artery of the East Coast, was her new home and her new front line. Her podcast, Urban Underground, was her only remaining weapon, and she was already aiming it at a new target, the invisible river of money flowing through Harbor Falls logistics, washing clean the fortunes of the city's elite. The city's elite were on full display that Tuesday. The Harbor Light Art Commission's annual fundraiser was a theater of performative charity. Men in $1,000 suits and women in architectural dresses air-kissed under spotlights, bidding on art to cleanse the reputations built on the very port Mara was investigating. Mara was there with a press pass and a lapel mic, her eyes scanning not the art, but the network. She didn't see him until he was standing in her path. He was an absence of motion in the swirling room, Cassian Voss, 36 years old and the head of the Voss family. His name was whispered in relation to the Voss Capital Fund, a squeaky clean investment firm that had, in a single decade, swallowed half the city's shipping infrastructure. But the old-timers, the ones Mara listened to in dockside bars, remembered the name Voss Intermodal, an underworld empire of transport and shadow. Cassian Voss was nothing like the brutes she imagined. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit so dark it looked black, his discipline visible in the perfect stillness of his hands. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. The crowd parted for him, and now he had stopped for her. He looked at her not like a woman, or even a person, but like a problem he was calmly assessing. His eyes were a flat, cold gray. "Miss Quinn," he said. His voice was a low baritone. No threat in it, just absolute, chilling certainty. "You're digging in the wrong place. You're going to get your hands dirty." Mara's reporter instinct snapped on. She kept her smile brittle. Getting dirty is part of the job. "Mr. Voss, or so I hear." He didn't smile. He stepped a fraction closer, forcing her to tilt her head back slightly. The faint scent of expensive wool and something metallic, like ozone, reached her. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice dropping so low it was for her alone, a vibration against her skin. "This city is mine, the docks are mine, and what I want, I protect." His gaze was unwavering, intense. "Every man you date will vanish until you finally admit you're mine." Mara's breath hitched. It wasn't a proposition. It was a weather forecast, a cold, hard fact. She gave a short, sharp laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, her fingers brushing the small, hard outline of the microphone beneath her blazer. She clicked it off. "That's quite the line. Mr. Voss. A bit archaic. Don't you think, are you trying to scare me into silence?" "I am trying," he said, his gaze never leaving hers, "to save you the trouble of being lonely." He turned, not waiting for a reply, and the crowd swallowed him as if he had never been there. The encounter left a cold slick of adrenaline on her skin. She dismissed it as a psychological tactic, a clumsy, chauvinistic attempt to get in her head, a story she'd tell later for laughs. That night, back in her loft, the threat felt distant. She was scrolling through logistics manifests on one screen and idly checking her dating app on another. A date was set for Thursday. Evan Rhodes, a startup lawyer, seem normal, smart, safe. Her phone buzzed, a new message from Evan. "Hey, craziest thing. An emergency. I have to move to Denver, like tonight, for a new job. Sorry to cancel." Mara frowned. She typed a reply. "Tonight, that's sudden. Is everything okay?" No reply. She tapped his profile. The profile was gone. A gray circle in the words, "User not found." She searched for him on a professional networking site. Gone. His fledgling law firm's social media page deactivated. It was as if Evan Rhodes had been digitally erased in the space of 15 minutes. A cold dread, far deeper than the harbor fog, settled in her stomach. The next morning, it got worse. Her inbox was flooded, messages from her listeners. "Mara, where did the new episode go? Can't find the podcast. Site is down." She tried to log into her own hosting platform and was met with a stark, red-bannered warning. Account suspended due to a copyright infringement claim from the Digital Media Enforcement Agency DMEA. Mara stared at the screen. The DMEA. She'd spent a decade reporting on federal agencies. She had contacts in D.C., in media law, in cybercrime. She'd never, not once, heard of the Digital Media Enforcement Agency. A quick search confirmed it. The DMEA did not exist in any federal charter. It was a ghost, a fabrication, but it had real power. It had silenced her. First Evan, now her work. Mara stood up from her desk and walked to the massive window. The sun was trying to burn through the morning haze, illuminating the endless procession of cargo cranes moving like mechanical dinosaurs. He had warned her, every man you date will vanish, but he hadn't just taken a man. He had taken her voice. He thought it was a threat. He thought he could manipulate her story, erase her from the narrative just like he erased Evan Rhodes. A slow, cold anger began to build, pushing out the fear. Mara Quinn picked up her recorder, her knuckles white. She looked out at the sprawling, indifferent city that Cassian Voss claimed as his. "You want to manipulate my story, Voss," she whispered to the glass, to the city, to him. "I'm not vanishing." She hit record. "I'll just have to tell it louder. If you were cut off from the city's grid, you went to breakwater. It was a sprawling, chaotic marketplace, crammed into stacked shipping containers on the city's forgotten pier. The air was thick with the smell of frying oil, diesel, and the metallic tang of the ocean. This was the real Harbor Fall, a place that operated on cash, barter, and nerve. Mara moved through the neon-lit maze, her senses sharp. She passed makeshift boxing gyms, where the sound of leather hitting heavy bags punctuated the rhythm of electronic music, and noodle bars steamed up the narrow walkways. Her destination was the Penny Siren, a floating bar and high-stakes card room built on an old ferry, its lights a greasy smear on the dark water. The owner, Jules Navarro, was wiping down the copper bar top, a lit cigarette dangling from her lips. Jules had been the youngest systems engineer at the Port Authority until she'd seen too much and resigned. Now, she was the city's foremost dealer in information. "They shut you down," Jules said, not as a question. She poured Mara a shot of rye without asking. "The ghost agency. DMEA? Cute." "It's Voss," Mara said, downing the rye. It burned a clean, hot line to her stomach. "He's trying to box me in." "Voss doesn't box. He suffocates," Jules said, her eyes scanning the room. "He's old money, old methods. But he's not the only shark in this harbor. You hear about Oxley Creed?" Mara nodded. "Bayline Brotherhood, new money, all flash. They're muscling in on the logistics unions. They're sloppy, loud." "Loud gets things done fast," Jules mused. "Voss is quiet, which means he's fighting a war on two fronts, Creed's noise, and you're light." Jules slid a small, button-sized object across the bar, a high-frequency audio bug. Voss Intermodal, the old yard. They still run skeletal crews there for his private logistics, a cleaning crew I know owes me. They go in at 2 a.m. You'll get 30 minutes. Mara pocketed the bug. "What do I owe you?" "Stay alive, and give me a credit when you blow this whole thing open." The adrenaline of planting the bug was still singing in Mara's veins 2 nights later when she walked home. She was cutting through the warehouse district, the streets empty, the sodium lamps casting a sick yellow glow. A semi-truck, its engine off, was idling at the intersection. She didn't think anything of it until she stepped off the curb. The engine roared to life. Simultaneously, another truck, a heavy-duty flatbed, turned the corner behind her, its horn blaring. She was caught. The first truck surged forward, blocking the street. The flatbed behind her accelerated. It wasn't trying to hit her. It was trying to kill her against the first truck. She was a mouse in a steel trap. Mara froze, the world slowing to a crawl, the diesel fumes, the blinding headlights. Then, a third vehicle. A black, impossibly sleek sedan that seemed to materialize from the shadows, moving at a speed that shouldn't be possible in the narrow street. It didn't slow. It slammed its reinforced front end directly into the flatbed's rear axle. The sound was a deafening shriek of metal. The flatbed fishtailed wildly, its horn dying as it crashed into a concrete loading dock. The first truck, its driver realizing the plan was shattered, threw its gears into reverse. The sedan's passenger door opened. Cassian Voss stood there. He wasn't breathing hard. He hadn't broken a sweat. He looked at her, his face half in shadow, with something like annoyance. He stepped toward her, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the debris. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer a hand. He simply reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, heavy business card. He pressed it into her hand. His fingers were cold. "You're attracting the wrong kind of attention, Miss Quinn," he said, his voice the same calm baritone from the gala. "Oxley Creed likes to break his toys. I do not." He turned and got back into the sedan, the car, its front end miraculously intact, save for a few scratches, reversed silently into an alley and was gone. Mara's legs finally gave out. She slumped against a brick wall, her heart hammering. She looked at the card in her shaking hand. It was black, ridiculously thick. No name, no number, just a single, embossed icon, a ship's anchor, with a clean break through its center. A few days later, her nerves settled but her anger focused. Mara decided to run an experiment. She reactivated her dating profile. If Cassian's threat was real, it was also a pattern, and patterns were evidence. She found him in an hour. Theo Park, charming, successful, the owner of a popular Korean fusion food truck. They messaged. He was witty, smart, and suggested they meet that Friday. Friday came. Mara was at the meeting spot, a small brewery downtown. Her phone buzzed at 7 o'clock, the exact time of their date. A text from Theo. "You won't believe this. A TV network just called. They want to feature my truck on a national food show. I have to drive to Philly right now. This is life-changing. I'm so sorry." Mara typed back, "Wow, congratulations." Another time, then. She tried calling his number an hour later. Disconnected. His food truck's social media, which had 10,000 followers that morning, was gone. The next day, a notification popped up from her bank, a deposit, $4,253. The memo line read Interregional Fee Control Tax Rebate. She snorted. The IRFC, another ghost. It was an insult. He thought he could buy her off, scare her, and then compensate her like some misbehaving pet. She immediately wired the exact amount to a local homeless shelter, took a screenshot of the transaction, and forwarded the entire chain to a secure, encrypted email address she kept just for this purpose. She was building a case. That night, she was back at the Penny Siren. Jules slid her the usual rye. "Theo Park, huh?" Jules said, polishing a glass. "Got a TV deal. Good for him." He vanished. "In Harbor Fall," Jules said, her voice dry. "Disappeared just means they're still breathing. Just not next to you. It's cleaner that way. Voss is a gentleman." "He's a monster," Mara said. Tomato. Mara found him where she knew he would be. At midnight, Cassian Voss often walked the North Pier alone, looking out at the empire he commanded. The fog was so thick she could only see a silhouette against the dark water. He heard her approach but didn't turn. "You're running out of men, Miss Quinn," he said. his voice carrying easily over the sound of the tide. "That was a pathetic move with the money," she shot back, stopping 10 feet from him. "Did you think I was for sale?" "I was compensating you for the inconvenience," he said, finally turning. The faint light from a buoy painted a sliver of his face. "Your podcast is still down. Your dates are gone. Your life is complicated. This is not a game." "Then stop playing it. You send your phantom agencies. You make men disappear. You have your rival try to crush me between 2 trucks. His head snapped toward her. "Creed is not my rival. He's a butcher. I am a surgeon. I removed you from that equation." "You're welcome." "I don't want your protection," she yelled, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "I don't want your money. And I am not your property." He stepped closer, closing the distance until she had to crane her neck to look at him. He was a wall of cold, expensive wool and absolute control. "Don't you understand?" he whispered, his voice laced with a frustration so deep it was almost pain. "You can't. You're digging into my world. Stop pulling my world onto you." Mara held her ground. She was shaking, but not from cold, from rage. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a matching whisper, sharp as broken glass. "I'm not pulling your world onto me, Voss. I'm pulling the light onto yours." Mara's podcast was still dark, but her investigation was not. The DMEA, the ghost agency that had silenced her, was the thread she pulled. It didn't exist in federal databases, but in the digital world, it left footprints. After 72 hours of code diving, she found its signature. It was buried deep in the metadata of procurement contracts for a fintech company called Aegis Clearing. Aegis was a glass and steel tower downtown that claimed to optimize global supply chains. Mara knew that was corporate language for hiding money. They used distributed ledger algorithms to make container shipments as fluid and as untraceable as cryptocurrency. As she dug into Aegis, a new name surfaced: Focus, the Federal Oversight Commission on Urban Security. It sounded official, but her gut screamed it was another ghost. A little more digging revealed it was a corporate-sponsored task force, a private security force with a public relations department. It had a memorandum of understanding with the Port Authority, giving it the right to conduct inventories without a warrant. It was a blank check for corporate espionage, or worse. She needed a way inside Aegis, and she had one: Ronan Hale. They had been rivals on the university paper, a relationship built on late-night debates and a sharp, unspoken attraction. Ronan, ever practical, had gone into corporate auditing. His profile listed him as a senior compliance officer at Aegis Clearing. They met at a sterile coffee shop in the Aegis lobby. Ronan looked good, if a little tired behind the eyes, his suit sharp. "Mara Quinn," he smiled, a genuine flash of the man she remembered. "Still chasing windmills. I see. Urban Underground. Catchy. Sorry to hear you got shut down." "It's why I'm here. Ronan, I think Aegis is involved." She kept her voice low. "I'm looking into a group called Focus." Ronan's smile didn't just fade, it fell. "We don't talk about them. Look, Mara, Aegis is it's just fintech. We streamline payments. It's boring." "Then why did I find the DMEA, the agency that shut me down, embedded in your metadata?" He paled, his hand tightening on his coffee cup. "You shouldn't have that. That's internal." "Ronan, they're using you," she said, leaning in. "Whatever this is, you can get out. Be my source." His phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen, and every ounce of color drained from his face. It was a total, visceral absence of blood. He stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped loudly on the tile. "I have to go," he stammered, his eyes wide, darting to the lobby's security cameras. "Ronan, what's wrong?" I just got a call. An opportunity. I'm being seconded to Taiwan, effective immediately." "Taiwan, Ronan, that's..." "I have to go. My plane leaves in 3 hours. Don't call me, Mara. Don't look for me." He fumbled for his wallet, threw a $20 bill on the table, and walked away. half running by the time he hit the revolving doors. Mara sat frozen. She waited 5 minutes, then called his number. "The subscriber you have dialed is not in service." Another one vanished. She was walking the pier that night, the cold spray on her face doing nothing to cool her fury, when a car door opened from the shadows of a warehouse. It was Cassian's sedan, the back door. She stopped. "Get in," his voice commanded from the darkness within. She got in. The interior was silent, insulated from the world, smelling of leather and cold steel. He was on the far side, a laptop open on his knees. He didn't look at her. "Ronan Hale was a fool," Cassian said. "He was sloppy. He was a loose end. You're lucky he was transferred, not erased." "You did that. You took him away." "I did not," he said, his voice hard. "His employers did. The same people you are poking with a very sharp stick. You think this is a story about money and ships? You're wrong." He turned the laptop toward her. It wasn't spreadsheets or bank records. It was a map of Harborfall. Not a street map, a map of lives. It was what she could only describe as his blackboard. Names, addresses, a longshoreman at Pier 4 with a daughter needing experimental leukemia treatment, a port inspector with a gambling debt to an offshore bookie, a food truck owner named Theo Park who had just received a miraculous, all-cash offer to be on a national television show, a startup lawyer named Evan Rhodes, now working in a mailroom in Denver, his law license under review. "This," Cassian said, "is the city you think you're saving. These are the pressure points, the human infrastructure. Every name on this list is a life I either protect or manage. You think Oxley Creed is the only one who plays dirty." Mara felt sick. It was a ledger of collateral damage. "The truth is the truth, Voss. You can't just hide it because it's painful." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes catching the faint glow of the dashboard. "The truth will get these people killed. It will get you killed. You're a reporter. You get a story. They lose their homes, their jobs, their lives. I don't want you to be poorer because of the truth. Miss Quinn, and I mean that in every sense of the word." "I'm poor because I chose it," she retorted, her voice shaking. "I'm not on your payroll. I'm not one of your assets to manage." "No," he said, a strange, quiet intensity in his voice. "You're not—" He closed the laptop, the car door unlocked. "Get out and stop meeting your old boyfriends. You're compromised enough." The next night, Jules called. "Get to the Overlook, now. The Kestrel Dawn is here." "The Kestrel," Mara said, grabbing her keys. "It's not due for 2 days." "It is now." From their vantage point above the container yard, they watched. At 2:17 a.m., as the massive ship was being guided in, the entire yard went black. Every spotlight, every security light, a total blackout. 7 seconds, Jules whispered, her hand steady on the long lens camera. The lights snapped back on. The yard looked identical. "What did we miss?" Mara asked. "We didn't miss it," Jules said, showing Mara the digital playback. She zoomed in on a specific container being offloaded by the crane. "Look, before the blackout where Esat." The container number, stark white on a blue field, red ending in 3, and after. The number now ended in 8. They changed its clothes mid-air. Mara had her hook. She had the DMEA, Aegis, Focus, and now visual proof of a container swap. She began to weave the narrative, recording the intro to her comeback episode. Then Oxley Creed hit back. The Radio Brigade, a notorious crew of mercenary hackers, launched their attack. Suddenly, the internet was flooded with the Mara Quinn tapes, deepfake videos of her taking bribes, audio of her seemingly admitting to fabricating evidence. A coordinated smear campaign designed to paint her as a fraud, a conspiracy theorist, a bitter woman who couldn't keep a job. Her credibility, the only currency she had, was draining away. Her few remaining advertisers pulled out. Even Jules looked at her with pity. She was refreshing her hate mail when a notification pinged, a secure, anonymous file transfer. It was a single folder. Inside were high-resolution satellite photos of the Kestrel Dawn container yard, time-stamped. One, from 3 days ago, showed a blue container, its number clearly ending in 3. A second photo, from an hour before the ship docked, showed an identical container, its number ending in 8, sitting in a hot zone in the very same yard. They hadn't swapped the numbers. They had swapped the entire container. At the bottom of the file was a simple text document, no message, just a single, unbreakable encryption key that would verify the image's metadata as authentic. It was the silver bullet. It was proof. She knew, with a certainty that made her bones ache. Who had sent it? He was giving her the gun, the bullets, and the map to the target. With a single condition, don't mention his name. Mara's fingers flew across the keyboard. She uploaded the photos. She embedded the key. She re-recorded her podcast, her voice no longer just angry, but sharp, precise, and backed by undeniable proof. She hit publish. The episode didn't just go live. It exploded. It was downloaded 10,000 times in the first hour. By morning, it was the #1 news podcast in the country. Her old newspaper was calling. National networks were calling. Mara Quinn was back, and she had just, inadvertently or not, become Cassian Voss's most effective weapon. The new media attention forced Harbor Falls elite to pretend they had nothing to hide. The bidding for Pier Quartz, the city's billion-dollar deep-water expansion, was suddenly a public spectacle. The venue a masquerade ball on the glass-enclosed rooftop of the Port Authority building, with a live string quartet playing mournful cello pieces that vibrated in the floor. Mara moved through the sea of expensive masks, her own a simple black domino. She was the most famous and most hated woman in the room. Her press pass had been approved by an ethics board that was terrified of her, and she could feel the stares. Oxley Creed, wearing a ridiculously ornate silver ram's head, was holding court by the ice sculpture, laughing too loudly. Mara was adjusting the gain on her recorder when a hand landed firmly on her lower back. "They're watching you," Cassian Voss's voice murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. He wore no mask. He guided her seamlessly onto the small dance floor just as the cellos swelled into a somber waltz. She was forced to put her hand on his shoulder. "What are you doing?" she hissed, trying to pull away. His grip was inflexible, though his hand remained properly, almost respectfully, placed. "There is a man with a red mask by the bar. He's not security. He's been taking your picture every 2 minutes. He is Creed's. Stop fighting me. Look like you're enjoying this. And smile." He pulled her closer, forcing her into the rhythm. It was a suffocating, elegant interrogation. His body was rigid with control, his frame solid and warm. She could feel his breath, cool and measured, near her temple. This was not a dance. It was a maneuver. "You're a shield," she accused, her voice tight. "You're a target," he countered, his eyes scanning the room over her shoulder. "Creed's man thinks you are here as my guest. He's now confused. Confusion is a good anesthetic." His gaze finally dropped to meet hers. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the city's puppet master slipped. She saw something else, not coldness, but a banked, controlled fire. His hand on her back was a brand, possessive, yet keeping her safe. The gala dissolved into fractured conversations. Mara, needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere, slipped through a side door onto the terrace. The rain had begun, a cold, soft drizzle that turned the city lights below into a watercolor blur. At the far end of the terrace was a structure she hadn't expected, a large, Victorian-style greenhouse, its glass panes opaque with humidity. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sound of the city vanished, replaced by the rhythmic tapping of rain on the glass roof. The air was warm, thick, and smelled of damp earth and sharp anise. Rows of dark, leafy plants she recognized as licorice root filled the space. The door creaked behind her. Cassian. He stood there for a long moment, the mist clinging to his dark hair, his tuxedo jacket already damp. He walked past her, not toward her, and looked up at the glass ceiling. "My great-grandfather built this," he said, his voice quiet. "He liked to grow poisonous things." "How fitting," Mara said. He turned to her. "You're shivering." "It's just cold." He stepped closer. Slowly, he unfastened the single button of his jacket, but instead of threatening her, he shrugged it off. He draped the heavy, impeccably tailored wool over her shoulders. It was impossibly warm. The heat from his body sank into her skin, through the thin silk of her dress, chasing the chill from her collarbones. It smelled of him, that clean, cold air scent, wool and ozone. "Better?" he asked. She clutched the lapels, her hands brushing the silk lining. "Why are you doing this, Voss?" He was close now, close enough for her to see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his white shirt. "Because," he said, "I'm tired of watching you freeze." He didn't move to kiss her. He just watched her, his gaze intense, as if waiting for her to make a decision. The rain drummed on the roof, a frantic, percussive beat. He raised one hand, his fingers brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was a spark on her cold skin. Then he leaned in, his movements agonizingly slow, giving her an eternity to pull away. She did not. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of question. It was soft, hesitant, the barest pressure. He was testing the water. He pulled back a fraction, his eyes still on hers, asking permission without a sound. Her answer was a sharp intake of breath as she closed her eyes. His other hand came up, not to her face but to the small of her back, resting on the wool of his own jacket. He held her there, a barrier of fabric and restraint, leaving the choice to her. Mara's hands, which had been clutching his coat, slid up to grip his shoulders. She was the one who closed the final inch. The kiss changed. It deepened. All the control he held in his city, in his life, seemed to focus on that single point of contact. It was a kiss of profound hunger, held back for too long. She could feel the desperate, frantic beat of his heart through his shirt, a rhythm that matched the rain on the glass. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, licorice, and the heat of his skin. A shrill, metallic sound, jarring and modern, sliced through the greenhouse, a container alarm from the docks, far below. They broke apart, gasping. The spell was shattered, but the air between them was electric, heavy with the unspent, suspended desire. Cassian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing harsh. "Damn this idiot," he whispered. He pulled back, though his hands remained on her, his thumbs rubbing small circles on her back through the coat. "You think I'm a tyrant," he said. "It wasn't a question. You made 3 men disappear. Voss. What else would I call you?" He looked at her, his expression raw, the mask fully gone. "I tainted every man around you so they couldn't taint you another way. Creed, Oxley. His methods are crude. He finds a weakness, women, gambling, debt, and he squeezes. He would have found one of your dates. He would have turned them, used them to get to you, to hurt you, to discredit you. I gave them clean exits, new lives. They're safe. They're just not here." Mara felt the floor tilt. It was a confession, but it was also a strategy. He had not been punishing her. He had been managing her. "So you're admitting it," she said, her voice shaking. "You're the problem and the solution." "I am the only solution you have," he said, his voice hardening as the mask returned. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a violent, angry vibration. She pulled it out. A breaking news alert. Elias Thorne, chairman of Focus, dead in Swiss mountaineering accident. Mara's blood went cold. She looked from the phone to Cassian's unreadable face. He wasn't a mountain climber. "No, and he was a bad investment," Cassian said flatly. A second alert followed, Pure Quartz emergency vote citing stability concerns. The UCC has fast-tracked the Pure Quartz vote. Bayline Brotherhood is now the sole bidder. "They won," Mara whispered, stunned. "While we were in here, Creed just won." He won a battle, Cassian said, stepping away from her, collecting his composure. Not the war. Her phone buzzed a third time. It was not an alert, it was an email. Anonymous, encrypted. The subject line was empty. The body of the email contained only one thing: a set of coordinates. Her heart stopped. She knew them. Every child in Harborfall knew the ghost story of Glassmouth Light, the abandoned lighthouse on the rocks. "It's a trap," Cassian said, his voice dangerously quiet as he read the screen over her shoulder. "I know," Mara said, pulling his coat tighter. It still held his warmth. "That's why I have to go." The sea spray was a physical assault, cold and sharp. As Mara climbed the slippery stone steps of Glassmouth Light, the lighthouse had been decommissioned for 30 years. A granite skeleton, warning ships off the rocks. The coordinates were a clear trap, but they were also a clear invitation. She found the entrance, a heavy iron door warped by salt, and pushed it open. The air inside was dead and smelled of rust and ozone. A single, thick power cable ran up the spiraling staircase, a modern anomaly in the ancient structure. She followed it to the lamp room. The old Fresnel lens was gone. In its place was a server rack, its blue and green lights blinking in the darkness. It was a data relay station, humming with power. She saw the Aegis Clearing logo on a router. This was a node in their shadow network, bouncing their stolen data far out to sea before sending it to its real destination. But it was what was tacked to the wall that made her blood freeze. A single faded photograph, a teenage boy, his hair too long, his suit ill-fitting, staring at the camera with a familiar, chilling intensity. Next to him, a younger girl, maybe 14, with a brilliant, defiant smile. Her name was Era, a voice said from the shadows. Mara spun, her hand flying to the heavy flashlight in her pocket. Cassian Voss stepped into the flickering light of the server rack. He was alone, no bodyguards. His face was pale, drawn tight. "Era Voss," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion as he looked at the photo. "My sister, she vanished 12 years ago." "Vanished," Mara whispered, her mind connecting the dots. "Like Evan and Theo?" "No." His voice was rough. "Not like them. Oxley Creed was just a lieutenant then, trying to make a name. His pattern was to take a family member to force a negotiation, a test of strength. My father, was an old-school traditionalist. He refused to negotiate. He saw it as weakness." Cassian turned from the photo to face Mara. The dim, colored lights cast haunted shadows across his features. Creed didn't know what to do. He'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. So he made an example of her. He killed her, made it look like she ran away. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. "Cassian." "I tore my family apart to find the man who gave the order," he continued, his voice a low monotone. "It was my own uncle. An internal power play. I took control of the family. I cleansed it of the traitors. And I've spent the last decade building a wall so high that no one could ever get in again. But Oxley got away. He built his own crew, the Bayline Brotherhood, on the scraps I left him. And now, he's coming for the whole city. He's coming for my port." "And for me," Mara said quietly. "He sees you as my weakness," Cassian said, his eyes finally meeting hers. "He sent you these coordinates, thinking I would follow. He's right, I did." He reached inside his jacket, the same one he had loaned her, and pulled out not a weapon, but a small, retro audio cassette. "This," he said, holding it out to her, "is the real war." She took it. "What is it?" "A secret indictment from the Asian American Maritime Commission. It's been buried for 6 months. Bayline has been using the container swaps the ones you exposed to smuggle weaponized electronics into Harborfall. Oxley isn't just trying to be a kingpin, he's trying to be an arms dealer." He checked his watch. "It's 3:05 a.m. He thinks I'm here alone. He has a team moving on this lighthouse at 4 a.m. He's going to wipe this place, and me, off the map." "And we have to leave." "No, you have to leave," he said. He pointed to the cassette. "I need you to broadcast this. Every word, at exactly 6 a.m., not a minute sooner. Why 6? Because that's when the UCC's emergency vote on Pier Courts becomes final. This evidence is the only thing that can stop it. It's the only thing that can ruin him. And you, she asked, her voice tight, you're going to stay here and fight them alone. This is my fight, Mara. It's my story, she countered, her voice rising. You don't get to die for it. The red emergency light from the server rack painted the room in a pulsing, bloody glow. He was so close. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the deep lines of a man who had been at war his entire life. They were sharing a story of loss. He, his sister, she, her career, her safety. Her hand, acting on its own, lifted. She didn't touch his face. She touched the old, puckered scar on his wrist, just visible beneath his cuff. A different kind of fight. Her fingers rested on it. A silent question. Can I trust this? Can I trust you? He didn't pull away. He slowly covered her hand with his own, his grip strong and warm. He turned her hand over, his thumb brushing her palm. And then he did something that shattered her. He pressed a light, reverent kiss to her knuckles. He didn't release her hand. He lowered it, pressing her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. He was giving her his word without saying a word. They stood there for a long, impossible moment. Two people in a red-lit room, surrounded by the sea and their enemies. They just breathed. His heartbeat a steady, powerful rhythm beneath her hand. The air was thick with their shared breath, the salt, the heat. It was a different kind of intimacy, a desperation to hold on, to feel something real before the world exploded. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. It was not a kiss, but it was just as binding. It was the edge of desire, a promise of what could be, if they survived the night. A sharp crack echoed from below, a gunshot, hitting the granite. They broke apart. They're early, Cassian said, his voice instantly cold. All business. He was already shoving her toward a trap door she hadn't seen. There's a sea cave below. Go, now. I'm not leaving you. Another shot, this time shattering the window. A high-powered searchlight flooded the room, blinding them. You have to, he roared. From the darkness outside, a new sound, a high-speed engine, a skiff, driven hard, appeared from behind the rocks, its driver a silhouette in the dark. Jules. Get to the boat, Cassian yelled, pushing Mara toward the broken window. He pulled his own gun from an ankle holster. I'll cover you. Jules, Mara screamed, scrambling onto the narrow ledge, the wind tearing at her. The drop to the water was 20 feet. Jump, Jules screamed back, expertly holding the boat steady in the churning water. Mara looked back. Cassian was at the door, firing into the staircase. Go, Mara. She jumped. The cold was a shock, a physical blow that stole her breath. She surfaced, gasping, and strong hands were hauling her over the side of the skiff. I knew he'd need a babysitter, Jules yelled over the gunfire. Cassian was on the ledge now, reloading. He turned to jump, but a spray of bullets erupted from the rocks below him. He grunted a sharp, involuntary sound. He stumbled, his hand flying to his shoulder. Cassian, Mara screamed. He looked at her, his face a mask of pain, and then he jumped, crashing into the water. Jules grabbed him, and Mara helped pull him in. He collapsed onto the floor of the boat, his jacket sleeve dark and wet. Go, he ordered Jules. The skiff's engine screamed as Jules spun them around the rocks, gunfire pinging off the hull. Mara dropped to her knees beside Cassian. He was bleeding. His blood was on her hands, on her clothes. She looked at the tape, still clutched in her other hand. 6 a.m., he gasped, his eyes clenched in pain. Mara grabbed her recorder, her hands shaking but her voice steady. His blood was on her, and the truth was in her pocket. She would not fail. At exactly 6 a.m., Mara's special report went live. It was not a podcast. It was a detonation. Her voice, clear and cold, narrated the facts over the scratchy, damning audio of the AMHC indictment. She aired the recording from Glassmouth Light. She laid out the container swap, the 7-second blackout, the shell company chain linking Aegis Clearing to Bayline Brotherhood, and the final, horrifying charge arms trafficking. Harborfall didn't just wake up, it convulsed. The stock market futures for port-related commodities plummeted. By 7 a.m., the local news had scrapped all other stories. By 8, the mayor was calling for an emergency session. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A little-known, rarely used charter was invoked, the Urban Exceptional Court. The UCC was a relic, an emergency tribunal designed to act faster than the federal government, with the unilateral power to freeze assets and halt civic operations. By 9 a.m., they had convened a televised emergency hearing regarding the Pier Quartz bid. It was legal theater, and Mara was the star witness. She sat composed, facing a panel of grim-faced judges. Across the room, Oxley Creed, now in a perfectly tailored suit, looked relaxed, flanked by a team of lawyers so slick they seemed to shimmer. His lead attorney, a silver-haired showman, spent an hour painting Mara as a disgruntled, fame-hungry journalist, a clickbait artist armed with doctored audio and conspiracy theories. She is, to put it simply, a storyteller, the lawyer boomed, gesturing to Mara. And you, sir, are a liar, Mara said evenly, not waiting for her turn to speak. The courtroom gasped. The lead judge hammered his gavel. Miss Quinn, you will wait. He's lying, Mara repeated, her eyes locked on the lawyer. He's calling the Asian American Maritime Commission liars. He's calling the satellite imagery liars. Ask him about focus. Ask him where Chairman Thorne is. The room fell silent. Focus, the corporate task force, had vanished. Its lawyers were absent. Its offices were dark. Miss Quinn, the judge said, his voice softer, we are not here to try Mr. Creed, but to assess the stability of the Pier Quartz bid. A stir at the back of the courtroom. A door opened, and Cassian Voss walked in. He was not in a tux. He was in a dark gray suit, his shoulder clearly stiff, his arm in a discreet black sling beneath the jacket. He was not with a legal team. He walked alone. Your Honor, he said, his voice filling the room, I am Cassian Voss, representing the Voss Capital Fund as a concerned citizen and the largest private logistics holder in this city. I am here as a third party. He placed a single leather-bound folio on the bailiff's desk. These are my internal audits of Bayline Brotherhood's shipping manifests for the last 18 months. Cross-referenced with Port Authority data, they show irregularities. I am submitting them to the court and to Miss Quinn to ensure full transparency. He looked at Mara, just for a second. It was not the look of a lover or even an ally. It was the look of a wolf recognizing another predator across a field. It was primal, possessive, and utterly restrained. He had just handed Oxley's head to the court on a platter, all while positioning himself as a civic-minded hero, and he had kept the Voss name clean. The court recessed for an hour. Mara found herself in a marble hallway, the scent of fresh paint and old floor wax thick in the air. The click of expensive shoes approached. He cornered her, not aggressively, but definitively, standing close to a freshly painted alcove. You're hurt, she said, her voice a low vibration. She looked at his shoulder. It's a scratch. You used me, she said, though there was no heat in it. It was a statement of fact. You gave me the evidence at the lighthouse so you could discover it later. I gave you the truth, he countered. You gave it a voice. We both got what we wanted. And now, he was close, too close for a public hallway. She could feel the heat rolling off him, see the tightness around his eyes. He was running on pure adrenaline. Now, he said, his voice dropping, you are in more danger than you have ever been. Creed is finished, but he's a rabid dog. He will lash out, back down, go dark. Let me clear the board. Mara felt a flash of the old anger. I'm not leaving, and I am not a pawn on your board, Cassian. The use of his first name hung in the air between them, stark and heavy. Before he could answer, the bell rang, calling them back. The verdict was swift. The UCC announced the Pier Quartz bid was frozen indefinitely, pending a federal investigation. For 30 days, all operations would be controlled by a new, neutral entity, the Interim Infrastructure Custodianship, the LTI. Oxley Creed stormed out of the courtroom, his face purple. Mara won. The city won. That night, she was in her loft, watching the rain lash against the big windows, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her exhausted. She was making tea when the world exploded. A sound like a bomb, the shriek of metal, the crash of brick, a garbage truck, its headlights blinding, had reversed at full speed through the street-level wall of her building, crashing into the elevator shaft, her loft on the top floor, shook as if in an earthquake. She ran for the stairs, her heart in her throat. She got out, scrambling onto the rain-slicked street just as the first sirens approached. She looked back at her building, at the gaping, steaming hole. And on the brick wall, just above the wreckage, painted in dripping red, a ship's anchor, wreathed in flames. It was not a threat. It was a declaration of war. She was standing, shaking, wrapped in a paramedic's blanket, when a black sedan pulled up. A man in a simple suit got out. He didn't look like a bodyguard. He looked like an accountant. "Miss Quinn," he said politely. "Mr. Voss sends his apologies. He has secured a suite for you at the Meridian. He insists." Mara looked at the man, then at the two other men who had fanned out, their eyes scanning the rooftops, an invisible net. She felt a cold, blinding rage. "You tell Mr. Voss I'm not his asset to protect." She stormed off, disappearing into the chaos of the emergency vehicles. She found him an hour later, at the only place she knew he'd be, the North Pier, standing in the rain, looking at the city. "You put a tail on me," she yelled over the wind. He turned, his face unreadable. "You were almost killed. And you knew he'd come for me, and you set your men on me like a piece of property." "I set my men on you because I cannot lose you," he roared, the control finally breaking, his voice raw. The rain plastered her hair to her face. "You don't get to make that choice. You don't get to manage me. Not anymore." He stood there, soaking wet, his sling visible, his entire empire shaking. He looked beaten. Not by Creed, but by her. He nodded. A sharp, painful gesture. "Fine." He was breathing hard. "Then what are your terms?" "My terms?" "For protection," he said. "For this alliance, on your terms. What are they?" Mara stared at him, the burning anchor tattooed on her memory. She was in a war she couldn't win alone, and he was offering her an army, but this time, asking her to be the general. "My terms," she said, her voice shaking but hard, "are that you tell me everything. No more ghosts, no more managing. Every move, we make together, and you, Cassian, you answer to me." He watched her for a long moment, the rain dripping from his chin. "Agreed," he said. "The agreement is," Mara stated, her voice echoing in the concrete confines of Jules's garage, "we hit Aegis, we don't hit Creed, and we don't hit Voss. We hit the money. We get the master ledger." Jules nodded, cleaning grease from her nails. "Aegis moves its cold ledger, the real, offline, encrypted backup once a week, tonight. It's moved from the main building to their disaster recovery vault via the North Star container bridge, a physical transfer, very old school." In the corner, a man who looked like he was made of wire and old leather sat polishing a set of metal picks. This was Bishop Crane, the best lock and safe man in the city before computers. "It's a 5-minute window," Bishop said, his voice a dry rustle. "When the gantry crane passes overhead, it masks the magnetic sensors on the bridge. They think it's elegant. It's just lazy." The garage door rumbled open, letting in the damp night air. Cassian Voss stepped inside, alone, his arm still in the sling. He was adhering to her terms. He was not in charge. He was a resource. He placed a heavy, matte black box on the workbench. Voss Signal Research, he said, nodding to the logo, a division Mara had never heard of. It's a silence box. It emits a 30-foot field that will dampen all RFID and cellular signals. It will buy you an extra 2 minutes before their server pings a lost connection alert. He also handed over a set of electrical schematics and a printed guard rotation schedule. Dorian Pike is your inside man, Mara asked, recognizing the name. Dorian is my head of security. He's loyal. He has managed the guard rotation for this. It was time. Jules and Bishop were loading the skiff. Mara was pulling on a pair of black tactical gloves. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the cold. Your thumb, a low voice said. Cassian was in front of her. She had fumbled the strap on her right glove. He took her hand, his fingers warm and sure, and began to fasten the Velcro strap himself. He was meticulous, his good hand moving with precision. He knelt slightly, his head bowed to the task. She was suddenly intensely aware of his proximity. The garage lights cast a shadow across his face, but she could feel his concentration. He finished the strap, his fingers lingering on her wrist for a fraction of a second. Then he looked up. His face was only inches from her arm. His mouth was level with her pulse. A jolt, sharp and hot as an electrical current, passed between them. The air crackled. He didn't move. He just looked at her, his gaze holding all the fire he kept banked, all the promises of the greenhouse. Survive this, he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. And then you can yell at me later. Mara's hand, the one he wasn't holding, rose. She placed it flat on his chest, over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful beat, a counterpoint to her own frantic pulse. She held it there for 1, 2, 3 seconds in agreement, a promise, a warning. Then she pulled her hand back. Let's go, she said to Jules. The heist was a study in shadows and rain. The North Star Container Bridge was a high, narrow catwalk suspended between 2 warehouses, the yellow sodium lights blurring in the downpour. Below them, the dark, churning water of the harbor. Jules was in the skiff, monitoring comms, Bishop with a surgeon's delicacy. Worked the lock to the bridge access door. It snicked open in under a minute. You're in, Bishop whispered into his mic. I'm on the far door. Go! Mara moved onto the bridge. The wind was a solid wall, trying to tear her from the metal grating. She clutched the silence box. As she reached the midway point, she saw the security hard case, a silver briefcase chained to the railing. This was the transfer. She set the box down, activating its low hum. Camera's looping, Jules' voice said in her ear. You have 4 minutes. Mara got to work, not with picks, but with a small, high-powered drill, boring out the lock. It was loud, but the wind and the groan of the nearby gantry crane covered the sound. The lock gave, inside, a single military-grade hard drive. Ledger D was scrawled on it in marker. She had it. I've got it, she said, sliding the drive into her pocket. Bishop, I'm coming to your... A klaxon, deafening and high-pitched, split the night. Mara, get out, Jules yelled. All the lights just went red. All of them. Mara sprinted for Bishop's door. It slammed shut, a heavy magnetic lock booming into place. She was trapped. She spun, running back the way she came. That door slammed shut. 2 steel gates, ones that weren't on Cassian's schematics, shot up from the floor, blocking both exits. What's happening? Mara yelled, hammering her fist on the gate. It's Dorian. Cassian's voice, frantic and raw, exploded in her ear. Pike, it was him. He's the mole. He was Oxley's man all along. Oh God, Mara. A hissing sound from above, the sprinklers, but it wasn't water. A thick, acrid-smelling foam began to spray down. It hit the metal grating and sizzled. It was a chemical wash, a solvent, designed to destroy any and all evidence. It would destroy the drive. It would destroy her. She huddled against the gate, holding the drive under her jacket, the foam already eating at the leather of her boots. Cassian, she screamed into the mic. I'm coming, he roared back, but he was miles away, at the garage. Dorian, I will kill you. Then, a new sound, below the bridge, a roar, not of a boat but of a diesel engine. The largest forklift Mara had ever seen, a heavy-duty container mover, burst from the warehouse doors below. It was moving impossibly fast, its massive forks raised. At the wheel, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage, was Cassian Voss. He had broken his promise. He was here. "Hold on," he yelled, not over the mic, but with his own voice. He angled the lift, the tips of the massive forks just under the bridge. He was 100 feet away, but closing. "He's gonna ram the pylon," Jules screamed. "No, he's not," Mara whispered, realizing his plan. The foam was rising, the air burning her lungs. Cassian didn't slow. He drove the forklift directly at the bridge, perfectly aligning his raised forks with the steel gate. With a sound like a thunderclap, the 2-ton forks, driven by an engine built to move ships, punched straight through the steel gate, shattering the lock and the wall. "Jump," he commanded. Mara didn't hesitate. She threw herself from the burning, acidic foam into the darkness, landing hard on the steel tines. Before she could even move, she was being hauled backward, his one good arm grabbing the front of her jacket, pulling her bodily into the operator's cabin. He slammed the forklift into reverse, pulling them out just as the chemical sprinklers reached full pressure, flooding the bridge. The cabin was tiny, a cage of steel and glass, smelling of oil and his scent. They were pressed together, shoulder to hip, her back against the wall, his body half covering hers. The rain and foam streaked the windows. A support cable, weakened by the foam, snapped, whipping against the windshield, shattering it. Glass exploded inward. Mara cried out, but Cassian was faster. He threw his body over hers, his good arm coming up to shield her head, his sling-bound arm pressed painfully between them. He tucked her head under his chin, his hand tangled in her hair, pressing her face against his neck. They were frozen. His heart hammered against her cheek, a wild, frantic rhythm. She was breathing his air, her hands trapped between them, flat against his chest, the smell of his skin, the rain, the adrenaline, was overwhelming. The cabin was dark, silent, save for their ragged, gasping breaths and the hiss of the chemical rain outside. They were pressed so close. It was impossible to tell whose trembling was whose. But even in the chaos, with his hand covering the back of her head, his touch wasn't violent. It was protective. It was desperate. And they held there, on the brink, the fire from the greenhouse, the tension from the garage, all culminating in this dark, suffocating, life-saving embrace. They did not kiss. They just held. The Green Chapel was a long-forgotten horticultural dome on a small island in the city's industrial canal system. It was the only safe house Jules trusted, inside, surrounded by overgrown, wild fruit trees and citrus. The hiss of the chemical foam felt a world away. The rain on the glass roof was a soft, steady drumbeat, a counterpoint to the adrenaline still singing in their veins. Cassian sat on a rusted wicker chair, his shirt off, his back rigid, the bullet graze from the lighthouse, combined with the stress of the forklift crash, had torn open. "Hold still," Jules muttered, threading a suture needle she'd pulled from a waterproof medical kit. "This is gonna hurt." "It already hurts, no," Cassian said, his voice tight. Mara stood in front of him. She held a damp cloth, also from Jules's kit. He was sweating, whether from the pain or the residual adrenaline. She couldn't tell. Her hand, acting of its own accord, reached up. She gently wiped the sweat from his temple, his cheekbone, his jaw. He didn't flinch. He didn't even open his eyes. He just let her, his body leaning into her touch almost imperceptibly. The distance between them had been erased. There were no more suits, no more bodyguards, no more city between them. Just the humid air, the scent of damp earth, and the quiet intimacy of the gesture. Jules finished with a sharp knot and stepped back. "Done. Don't do anything stupid for at least 12 hours. I'll take Bishop and secure the boat. Don't light any fires." She and Bishop disappeared into the rainy darkness, leaving the two of them alone. The only light came from a string of battery-powered fairy lights Jules had strung up, casting a soft, warm glow. Cassian finally opened his eyes. He looked at Mara, his gaze raw and unguarded. He was a man who had just broken every rule he had ever made, and he had done it for her. She sat on the edge of a potting bench in front of him. The silence was thick, filled with everything they hadn't said. He stood, slowly, wincing as his shoulder pulled. He walked to her. He didn't stop until his knees were almost touching her. He looked down at her, the rain and the fairy lights reflected in his dark eyes. He tilted his head, and his mouth, soft and warm, brushed her temple. It was a feather-light touch, a question. He lingered, his breath stirring her hair, and then he traced a slow path down her cheekbone with his lips. He was not taking, he was asking. His hand, his good hand, came to rest on her hip. It was not a possessive grip. It was an anchor, a point of contact, the pressure just enough to let her know he was there, but light enough that she would have to be the one to close the distance. Her hand came up to his chest, and she pulled him the final inch. The kiss was not like the one in the other greenhouse. That had been a question, a spark. This was a conflagration. It was long and deep, a release of all the pent-up fear and tension and white-hot adrenaline. It was the rain on the roof, the scent of ripe fruit, the taste of him. They whispered each other's names against each other's mouths, a broken, desperate litany. His heavy jacket, the one from the gala, which he'd been using as a sling, slid from his bad shoulder and fell, unheeded, to the rattan chair. His hand slid from her hip, tracing a line up her side, to the small of her back. His fingers brushed the hem of her shirt, and he stopped. He pulled back, his breath ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "Continue," he whispered, his voice thick. Mara's heart was a trip hammer. She was trembling. She nodded, a tiny, jerky motion, but then, as he leaned in again, she put one finger to his lips. He froze. "Let the victory night be over first," she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. "Let this be after, not during." She needed this to be a choice, not a consequence. A slow smile, the first truly unguarded smile she had ever seen, touched his lips. He captured her finger, kissing the tip, before lacing his good hand through hers. "After," he agreed, his voice a low vow. He rested his forehead against hers again. They just stood there, hands clasped, breathing each other in. The fire was still there, but it was banked, held in check, and it was infinitely hotter, more powerful, for the promise of the wait. An hour later, the fire was of a different kind. Mara had the Ledger Delta drive plugged into Jules's waterproof laptop. Cassian sat beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring weight. "My God," Mara whispered, her eyes flying across the screen. It was all there, the container swaps, the arms deals, the ghost agencies, but there was more. The core of it. "He was embezzling," Mara said, stunned. Oxley was running Bayline at a loss. He was covering his debts by siphoning money from the Harbor Fall Port Authority Insurance Fund, a fund meant to protect the families of longshoremen, like the one with the sick daughter. He was stealing from the families he was pretending to champion, Cassian said, his voice turning to ice. And Dorian, Mara kept scrolling. Dorian built Focus, not for Oxley, for himself. It was his policy shell. He was using Oxley's greed to build a private, legal army. He was planning to take over everything, from both of you. They now had the how. They had the why. They just needed the when. "The final piece," Cassian said, pointing to a scheduled transfer. "Oxley and Dorian are moving a final shipment of electronics tonight to cover the hole in the insurance fund before the LTI audit. They're moving it to Depot North Star." Mara looked at him. A plan forming. Depot North Star. The depot the LTI just took over. The one they, for PR, put under 24/7 public live stream. "They don't know," Cassian said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading. "The LTI doesn't take physical control until tomorrow. Tonight, it's still Bayline's crew, but the cameras are live." "It's the perfect trap," Mara breathed. "We leak the live stream. We show the entire city, the entire world, exactly what they're moving." Cassian was quiet for a moment. "It's not enough," he said. "They'll blame the crew. They'll cut their losses. You need to pin it to Dorian and Oxley, permanently. And to do that, you need to be clean." "What do you mean?" "This runs deep," he said, turning to face her, his expression grim. "Dorian was my man. That makes me complicit. Even if I wasn't, when this breaks, Oxley will burn everything. He'll take me down with him, and he'll point to you as my weapon. He'll say this was just one Mafia family trying to destroy another." "He's right," Mara said, her heart sinking. "Unless I'm the one who lights the match," Cassian said. He took her hand. "I file an official internal complaint with the LTI, with the UCC. I will confess to the shadow operations of Voss Capital. I will expose my own family's gray areas, my own vulnerabilities, including my traitorous head of security, Dorian Pike. I will burn my own darker half to create a firewall of truth." He was offering to sacrifice his empire, to tarnish his own name permanently, to protect her. "You'll be exposed," she whispered. "They could investigate you." "They will," he said, "but it will stop any retaliation against you. You will be the journalist who broke the story, not the woman a mob boss used. It's the only way." Mara looked at him, at the man who had once threatened to erase her world, now offering to sacrifice his own. "I agree," she said, her voice clear, "with one condition." He waited. "No more protecting me by cutting my options. No more secrets. We do this together. Every decision, every file, every call. We speak it, out loud, between us. No more games." He brought her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "On my honor," Cassian Voss said. The Port Transparency night was live. Mara's face, calm and professional, filled the corner of a screen that was split with a dozen feeds from Depot North Star. Her resurrected Urban Underground podcast was now a full-blown news operation, and over 50,000 people were watching the supposedly empty, LTI-controlled warehouse. "What you are seeing," Mara said, her voice even, "is the public's view of our city's infrastructure. Tonight, we watch together. We ensure the handover is clean." In the depot, Oxley Creed watched a different feed his own security cameras. He saw the live stream icon. He saw the viewer count. And he saw his own trucks, loaded with the illicit electronics, pulling up to the loading bay. "Oh, it's a trap," he snarled, throwing his monitor to the floor. "It's all a trap. Get our people in there. Burn it. Burn all of it and shut her up. Shut her up now." The plan splintered. Oxley, desperate, dispatched his team to storm the depot and destroy the evidence. Dorian Pike, colder and more precise, took his own team. He wasn't going to the depot. He was going to the source. He was going to Mara's new safe house, the loft above Jules's garage. The agreement had been clear. "We move together," Mara had said. Cassian, his arm now in a more functional brace, stood with his small, loyal team. "Jules, Bishop, you're with Mara. Lock it down, Pier. 7 is on alert. I've triggered a silent alarm about a structural failure at the depot. There'll be the neutral element, the rest of you. You're with me. We're not letting that evidence burn." The night exploded. At Depot North Star, Cassian and his men slipped in through the maintenance tunnels, just as Oxley's crew used a truck to ram the main bay door. It was chaos. Alarms blared. Cassian moved through the maze of shelving. A ghost. He found Oxley in the central sorting area. The automated inventory scanners were still active, sweeping the floor in rhythmic, green and red laser grids. Voss Oxley roared, pulling a heavy wrench from a nearby bench. "You set me up! That bitch set me up!" "You set yourself up, Oxley," Cassian said, his voice dangerously calm. "He didn't draw a weapon." They met in the center of the floor. Oxley swung the wrench, a wild, furious arc. Cassian, even with one bad arm, moved with a brutal economy. He deflected the blow, stepped inside Oxley's reach, and delivered a short, precise strike to the man's ribs. The fight was ugly, a close-quarters brawl under the sweeping laser lights. Every move was being captured, not as clear video, but as a digital scan of their heat and motion. Cassian was the picture of control. He was not fighting to kill. He was fighting to capture. Oxley, slick with sweat and rage, slipped on a patch of spilled oil. He went down, his head hitting the concrete. He was stunned. Cassian stood over him, breathing hard. His good hand clenched into a fist. He could have finished it. He could have ended the man who killed his sister. Instead, he looked up at the scanner, a red line sweeping his face. He unclenched his fist. He was choosing. He was showing the cameras, the city, that his law was one of discipline, not animal rage. At the loft, the fight was just beginning. Dorian Pike, using his own security codes, had bypassed the lock. He kicked the door open, his gun up. "End the broadcast, Mara!" Jules moved, but Dorian was faster, leveling his weapon at her. "Ah, the mechanic. Sit down, you two, Bishop, hands where I can see them." "Dorian," Mara said, her voice steady, her eyes on him, but her hands were still on her keyboard. "You were smart, Mara, I'll give you that," Dorian sneered. "But you backed the wrong monster. He's just a relic. I'm the future." "The stream is still live, Dorian," Mara said. 50,000 people just heard you." "They can't see me," he said, moving behind her, "but they will hear this." He pressed the cold muzzle of the gun to her temple. "Don't," Jules whispered. "No," Mara yelled, a sharp, brilliant gamble. "Don't shoot her. You don't want me. You want the data, the backup server it's at. It's at 2407 Ridge Avenue." She was reading the address live on air. It was a fake address, but Dorian didn't know that. He roared in anger, yanking her from the chair and spinning her around. "You think you're clever?" He shoved her toward a heavy steel lighting rig. "You're done." In the depot, Cassian heard it all. He had a comms link to Mara's audio feed. He heard her fake the address. He heard the sound of the struggle. His heart, which had been steady even against Oxley, now hammered against his ribs. He looked at the stunned Oxley at his feet. He looked at the chaos as Pier 7's blue and white-clad teams began to breach the main door. He made his choice. He tapped his earpiece. "Pier 7. Primary target is in the Central Bay. Non-compliant but incapacitated. I have a secondary, active shooter situation at..." He gave them Jules's address. He abandoned his post. He left the fight he had won, sprinting for his car, for the only fight that mattered. In the loft, Dorian was tying Mara's hands to the lighting pole with a zip tie. "You wanted to be a star, fine. You can say goodbye to your audience." He pointed his gun at the laptop, ready to destroy it. Mara looked straight into the webcam. Her webcam. Her audience. Her hands were bound, but her voice was free. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I did back a monster. 12 years ago, a man named Oxley Creed murdered a 14-year-old girl named Era Voss to gain leverage. Her brother..." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she did not stop. "Her brother, Cassian Voss, has been living in the dark ever since. I know what that dark looks like, and I am not afraid of it." She looked straight at the lens, at the 50,000 people, at him. "I chose to stay in the most dangerous place in this city, because there is someone here who does not run from the truth." Dorian, stunned by her speech, was momentarily frozen. That's when Jules acted. She lunged, not for Dorian, but for the red fire alarm pull station on the wall. An ear-splitting bell, and then the deluge. Fire suppression foam, thick and white, began to rain down from the ceiling. Dorian yelled, blinded. Mara, in one explosive movement, kicked the base of the heavy light rig, sending it crashing toward him. He stumbled back, slipping on the wet floor, Bishop moving faster than his age. through the heavy hex key he'd been palming. It hit Dorian's wrist. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the floor, and disappeared into the rising, white foam. Everything was chaos, sound, and white. The loft door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges. Cassian Voss stood there, his face a mask of primal fury, his suit soaked, his arm in its sling. He arrived in the exact, terrible second that Dorian Pike, scrambling through the rising foam, put his hand back on the gun. Time stopped. Dorian fired. The sound was a flat, wet pop in the dense foam. Mara screamed, but Cassian was already moving. He didn't lunge for Dorian. He didn't lunge for the gun. He lunged for her. The bullet tore a hot, vicious line across the back of his good wrist, but he didn't falter. He crashed into her, his arms, one strong, one injured, wrapping around her, spinning her so his back was to Dorian. He shielded her with his entire body, a human bulwark, and tucked her head under his chin. "It's over, Dorian," Cassian growled, his voice vibrating through her. Mara, her hands still zip-tied, her face pressed against the damp wool of his suit, felt the wet, warm slick of his blood dripping onto her bound hands. He was hurt. He was bleeding for her. Her fingers fumbled, finding the small, hard-wired button disguised as a stud on her jacket. A secondary, close-range camera she always wore. She pressed it. The feed went live. "Over!" Dorian shrieked, his face emerging from the foam, twisted in madness. He saw the blinking red light on her jacket. He didn't see a camera. He saw a microphone. He saw his last chance to speak. He grabbed it, pulling Mara and Cassian toward him. "You think he wins the relic? The man who wanted to stay in the shadows?" Dorian's face filled the camera, visible to tens of thousands. "I built focus. I made it a legitimate shell. I was going to use his muscle and Oxley's greed to take it all. It was mine." The main door crashed open again. This time, it was Pier 7 moving in perfect tactical formation, their weapons raised, their blue and white uniforms stark against the foam. They saw Dorian Pike, weaponless, confessing his entire conspiracy to Mara's jacket. It was over. Simultaneously, across the city at Depot North Star, similar floodlights snapped on. Oxley Creed, still on his knees, was illuminated for the press and the LTI to see, surrounded by the crates of illegal electronics. The UCC, broadcasting over an emergency channel, issued a statement Oxley Creed and Dorian Pike were in custody. All known witnesses, including Mara Quinn and Cassian Voss, were under immediate state protection. The chaos subsided. The loft was a ruin of foam and shattered wood. Cassian stood at the center of it all, his blood still dripping. He was at the final junction. His networks were still dark, his assets still hidden. He could vanish in the chaos, take what was left, and disappear. Mara watched him. She was free of the zip ties. Thanks to Bishop, Cassian looked at her, his eyes unreadable. Then he walked past the Pier 7 operatives. He walked to his sodden coat, retrieved 2 items, and walked back to her, ignoring the medics. He didn't give the items to the authorities. He gave them to Mara. The first was a heavy, old-fashioned brass key. The second was a thin, leather-bound ledger. "The key to the Voss family vault," he said, his voice rough, "and the family ledger, the real one." It was everything. The offshore accounts, the shadow agreements, the leverage, the crimes. It was the heart of his dark kingdom. He turned to the stunned Pier 7 captain. "I am surrendering my family's private assets and all documentation related to my internal investigation of Dorian Pike, in full cooperation with the UCC." He took a deep breath. "I'm ready to testify." He had chosen. He had stepped out of the shadow, not for the city, but for her. The field medical station was a sterile white tent under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. Mara was finishing the bandage on Cassian's wrist. Her hands were shaking with the adrenaline come-down, but her motions were sure. He hadn't stopped watching her. She taped the final piece of gauze. "There," she whispered. His good hand came up, not to touch her face, but to cup the back of her head. He pulled her in. The first kiss was a collision. It was frantic, desperate. tasting of salt, foam, and the metallic tang of his blood. It was the culmination of every fight, every chase, every moment of denial. It was a drowning man taking his first breath. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. They were both trembling. A slow, exhausted smile spread across his face. A single tear cut a clean path through the grime on her cheek, and she smiled back. He leaned in again. The second kiss was different. It was slow. It was deep. It was devoid of panic and full of promise. His good hand slid from her hair down her back, tracing the curve of her spine, pulling her flush against him. Her fingers, no longer bound, curled, tangling with the edge of his new bandage. It was not a kiss of adrenaline. It was a vow. A bottle of soda popped open, the sound ridiculously loud in the tent. Jules stood there, holding the bottle. "Next time," she said, her voice deadpan, "just warn me before you schedule the live broadcast. My insurance company is going to hate this." The air broke. Mara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Cassian threw his head back and laughed, a real, unrestrained sound of pure relief. Cassian Voss faced a public hearing. He did not hide behind lawyers. He testified, confirming every discovery Mara had made and adding his own. He laid the Voss family's sins bare. Because of his full cooperation, he avoided prison, the sentence supervised probation, and the complete forced dissolution of Voss Intermodal's gray market operations, his seized assets. The contents of the vault he had given Mara were used to seed a new entity, the Independent Harborfall Restoration Fund. Mara launched a new podcast. She called it Lit Harbors. The first episode was not about Oxley or Dorian. It was about Cassian. It was not a puff piece, and it was not a condemnation. She told the story of Era. She told the story of Evan Rhodes. She told the story of a man caught between the shadows he was born into and the light he was forced to find. She told the truth. The sun was rising over Harborfall, on the glass roof of the Green Chapel. The air was cold and clean. Cassian held out his hand. On his palm was a single, simple key. "The key to the Green Chapel," he said. "Not to lock you in, but so we can plant a new row of licorice." Mara took it, her fingers closing over his. He looked out at the city, at the port beginning to stir in the morning light. "I don't need every man you date to vanish anymore," he said softly, "because you chose to stay." Mara smiled, turning to face him. "And you," she said, "you have to admit, you belong to me." He kissed her, and this time it was calm. It was the peace after the hurricane. The camera pulled back, leaving the two of them on the rooftop, overlooking the waking city. Harborfall was bright, the port was humming, their happiness was not clean, it was not perfect, but it was real. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Please subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.